Welcome to this presentation on coastal management in introduction. My name is Gerald Schernewski. I'm head of the Coastal Marine Management Group at the Leibniz-Institute for Baltic Sea Research and at the same time professor at Klaipeda University. A brief overview. At first, some facts about European coasts, some words about problems and challenges, and then the solution to deal with these problems, namely integrated coastal zone management. We reflect the present state of ICZM in Europe, and I will finish with a summary and some future perspectives. Some facts. The coastline of the European Union is about 68,000 kilometers long. This is longer than the coastlines of the United States or Russia. And over 40% of the EU population live in coastal regions. About 51% of all tourist beds are located at the coast in the European Union. So the coasts are the most popular holiday destinations in Europe, employing over 3.2 million people. And this has consequences, because we need to protect our coasts. And coastal protection, to protect the coasts from the risks of erosion and flooding, exceeds 5 billion euros per year. Some slides to visualize the problem. Here, the population density. Red colors indicate high densities. You see immediately in Italy, in Spain, in Portugal, in France, and even in some places of Scandinavia, a concentration of the population at the coast. And the same is true for the tourists. Again, red colors indicate high number of tourist beds relative to the number of the local population. Here again, Italy, Spain, France have this kind of concentration. But interesting is that in Germany, in Mecklenburg-Vorpommern, we have a very high tourist concentration compared to the local population as well. But there are problems. Sea level rise. During the last 120 years, the global sea level did rise about 20 centimeters. And this rising sea level accelerated to a rate of above 3 millimeters per year during the last decades. The small red arrows in the picture indicate areas where the sea level is rising. Only in Scandinavia, we have, because of a land uplift, a decreasing relative sea level and no problems with erosion. This is only one problem we are facing in the European Union. And in the 1990s, the European carried out a comprehensive survey and asked a lot of communities and municipalities about coastal problems. And in general, it became obvious that there is an inadequate, non-sustainable management of our coasts. Because legislation and policy is very often sectorally based and not coordinated. There are inappropriate and isolated sectoral planning decisions. We have rigid bureaucratic systems and limited local creativity. And if there is creativity, they often face a lack of resources. The problem is, quite often, the lack of development visions. This means the local people do not have an idea how their coast should look like in 20 or 50 years. Further, they complained about a limited understanding of coastal processes, or, if this knowledge is there, that this scientific knowledge is isolated from end users who need this information. So the solution to all these problems was meant to be integrated coastal zone management. And the European Union defined it as a dynamic, continuous and iterative process designed to promote sustainable management of coastal zones. ICZM shall seek a balance between the benefits of economic development and the human use of coastal zones, of nature protection, of coastal protection, and minimizing the loss of human life and property. And it shall ensure access to coastal zones. The latter is an important issue in many Mediterranean countries. And this shall be balanced within the limits set by the natural dynamic and the carrying capacity of the coastal systems. So, ICZM is the sustainable development of coastal zones. And it takes into account the so-called ecosystem approach to management. This is a very fashionable term, and I will give you only one definition. There are dozens on the market. UNEP defined it as an approach that goes beyond examining single uses, species, or ecosystem functions in isolation. Instead, it recognizes ecological systems for what they are, a rich mix of elements that interact with each other in important ways. And the sketch shows the complexity of this approach. An example how ICZM looks like in practice. On the top, we see a small coastal city, and this wants to grow. On the left-hand side, the growth takes place without planning. So it means the town spreads along the coast, causes pollution, and this pollution causes degraded coastal waters. On the right-hand side, a planned development where a buffer strip prevents pollution of the sea and we keep healthy and productive seas. An important word is integrated, and it has many meanings. It refers to the integration of multiple objectives, of multiple instruments and policies needed to meet these objectives, integration of all relevant policy areas, sectors and level of administration, multiple disciplines, and of course, terrestrial and marine parts. Because of all these aspects, we very often call it integration of temporal, spatial, horizontal, and vertical aspects. What does it mean, integration of multiple objectives? On the left-hand side, the picture shows conflicting uses which are uncoordinated. So, taking place at the same spot. On the right-hand side, the ICZM solution, where each of the uses has a certain area and is not in conflict to the other uses. Integration of multiple policies. So we have integrated coastal zone management taking care of the immediate coastline. This is based on EU recommendations on ICZM and on EU Habitats Directive. We have policies focusing on the sea, the Marine Strategy Framework Directive, EU Maritime Spatial Planning. And we have directives that focus on river basins, the EU Water Framework Directive. And all these policies interact in the coastal zone and have to be coordinated. So, how does it look like, integration of land and sea in a coastal zone? First of all, a general definition of the coastal zone does not exist. We agree that it has to cover a band of land and sea, but this can be defined based on functional relationships, on geographic properties, or administrative boundaries. This means that depending on the national definitions, the seaward boundary can be several hundred meters or up to the exclusive economic zone. And the same is true for the landward boundaries. It can be the municipality at the sea, but the river basin as well. In general, we see a trade-off between a functional large-scale definition, for example, the integration of watershed with large parts of the sea. This is very comprehensive, but management is difficult, very often requires international cooperation. On the other hand, if we define it on an administrative level, small scale, we have an efficient management, but very often we cannot deal with the problems on a local level because the problems are transferred, for example, from the river basin. ICZM is meant as a stepwise and circular process, and this is very important. And it covers aspects like information collection, stakeholder involvement, development of measures, decision-making, and management. So this cycle has an initiation stage, where you become aware of the problem, a planning stage, implementation of solutions, and a monitoring and evaluation stage, where you have a look, were your implemented measures successful or not? If not, or if other problems occurred, you go through the cycle again. So it is not restricted to management in the narrow sense. And it is an iterative process. I already talked about the relationship between ICZM and sustainable development. And in 1992, ICZM in Europe was strongly promoted based on the Rio Declaration on Environment and Development, a global agreement, because there were several program areas. One was an integrated approach to the planning and management of land resources and integrated management and sustainable development of coastal and marine areas, including exclusive economic zones. In Europe, this promoted ICZM very much. This has consequences on regional levels as well, because we saw the development of regional agendas such as the Agenda 21 for the Baltic Sea region. And this had an action program, and under spatial planning actions, we have explicitly the further development of integrated coastal zone management. We see here an interesting aspect, because ICZM shifted from its nature protection origin towards spatial planning and was more and more incorporated as a part of spatial management. ICZM policy in Europe. As a consequence of the inadequate management, the European Parliament agreed on recommendations on ICZM in 2002. And this strategy, this recommendation asked the member states to develop national strategies, asked them to implement principle for integrated management of the coastal zone, had to develop a strategy for promoting integrated management of larger areas, and they had to consider the development of national strategic plans for the coast. And this policy covered all principles that we addressed already. A broad thematic and geographic perspective, long-term perspective, an adaptive, iterative management, had to take care of local specificity, so they favored very much local to regional approaches to enable local people to get involved. They had to respect the carrying capacity of ecosystem so that they are not destroyed. They had to involve all parties. Public participation is an important aspect. Involvement of all relevant administrative levels was important, and they should seek for a coherence between sectoral policy as well as between planning and management. So very comprehensive. In general, we can summarize that this focused on regional approaches, facilitating policy planning management with a strong focus on stakeholders, on those who are affected, and the public. To promote ICZM in Europe, the idea was to collect 350 so-called best practice examples and to document them in a database, with the idea that these examples can serve for others who have similar problems and help other regions to find fast solutions. But was it successful? A brief summary. So first, ICZM is part of the Agenda 21 process. It has the goal to ensure a sustainable development, and it implements the Agenda 21 ideas. It includes the ideas of the so-called ecosystem-based ecosystem approach to management. But a separate legally binding directive, a law on ICZM, still does not exist in Europe. Ideas are integrated and demanded from different sides in international agreements, in EU guidelines and directives, and in national landscape and spatial planning. So the major ideas are, despite the lack of separate policies, widely accepted. So today it is very common to involve and inform the public, to ensure a public participation, to involve those who are affected, the stakeholders. So in this respect, it was successful. However, despite a long development period, despite a large amount of literature and scientific results on ICZM, it remained largely academic, and its practical impact for solving local problems was very limited. One reason is that it did not have a clear guideline, a clear structure how to carry it out in practice. And this is what a new approach, a modified, further developed approach, shall provide, the so-called systems approach framework for ICZM. And this systems approach shall reduce the time that is needed between the recognition of a problem and the implementation of a solution. Because what we today see is that there are increasing pressures, and climate change and sea level rise ask for fast solutions. So we cannot spend 30 years from the recognition of a problem to the solution as it happened in the past quite often. And with this, I'd like to thank you for your attention.